OMA members, and it's going to bring together the thought leaders to engage in a discussion of the future role of the physician in an evolving healthcare system. The recording for this session will be posted on the website and allow all members to hear the panel discussion. The two sessions we're going to have after that is going to be on OMA governance transformation and the RAC recommendations. These are consultation sessions. The next 2 days are going to be the meeting of our council, and these sessions are organized to get you to ask the questions that you need to ask to get the information that you need to make decisions over the next 2 days. We've heard from your council feedback and post-council evaluation sessions that you are lacking opportunities for networking, so we've organized a network session to meet your colleagues in a social setting at the end of the day. So this is how the day has been laid out. 3 sessions, all recorded. First one open to all members. The next one to help council delegates make the decisions over the next 2 days, and a networking session after. I would like to get started with this, and I would like to introduce you to the President of the OMA, Dr. Sohail Gandhi. Dr. Gandhi, please.
Hi, everyone. It is a great pleasure for me to welcome everyone to the first part of the Fall Council. I'm really looking forward to all of the sessions today, and I'm really looking forward to all the productive work that's going to be done both this afternoon and over the weekend. I just want to acknowledge that this is one of the first times that we're doing something like OMA Talks, and I think it's really neat that we're going to try and take a more strategic and forward-thinking view at our organization. And part of that is to invite a number of guests to come and watch these OMA talks. So in the audience today, I believe we have Nancy Whitmore, who is the registrar at the CPSO. Hi there. We know that Dr. Peter Donnelly, who's President and CEO of Public Health Ontario, he's on his way. I don't think he's quite here yet, but he's on. Oh, no, sorry, he's there. My apologies. Didn't see you there. Ms. Anna Greenberg, who's the interim President and CEO at Health Quality Ontario, is also coming. And as is Ms. Dawn Tyminski, who's the CEO of the Nurse Practitioners Association of Ontario. And they'll be attending the first session. So I want to, again, thank you all for taking the time to be here today. And I want you to know that we're going to have what I think is a really exceptional keynote presentation. So, this is probably the first time that I can think of since I've been involved in the OMA that we're actually inviting one of the most distinguished thinkers on how digital disruption is transforming the way physicians practice at the OMA. So I think all of us know that the world is changing, and the world is changing fast. We now have watches that can diagnose heart arrhythmias. And the thinking is that by next year, we'll have watches that can monitor your blood pressure, blood glucose level, and your O2 sats. We know that that technology doesn't apply only to wearable technology. We're facing a world of artificial intelligence that can help us make diagnoses. I've seen some software that is really quite remarkable that's out there. And these changes are going to create not only are they going to create challenges for OMA members, but I submit to you that they're going to create some opportunity for OMA members if we as an organization can help you all prepare for that. So we need to work together to ensure that our physicians will have the skills and the tools that are necessary to adapt in this fast-paced, changing environment. So today I'm going to introduce you to Dr. Stephen Wartman, who's had an incredibly distinguished career. For the last 13 years, Dr. Wartman has served as President and CEO of the Association of Academic Health Centers. Now, this is a global nonprofit that's based in Washington, and it is dedicated to the education of the next generation of physicians. In 2016, Dr. Wartman founded this association, and he offered healthcare leaders around the world a view of the seminal issues that are going to transform healthcare in the 21st century. And it's a topic that he's been writing proliferately about. Now, before I welcome him to the podium, I just want to give you a few details about how today's going to work. Dr. Wartman has a keynote presentation that he will deliver for all of us. After that, we will have panelists who will come up and give 10-minute presentations of their own. And this will be followed by a sort of a robust question and answer session that our President-elect, Dr. Samantha Hill, will be moderating. And after that, we will conclude. our presentation and go on to the next topic. So with all of that, I'd like us all to extend a very, very warm welcome to Dr. Stephen Wartman, who is, where do you, oh, there you went. You disappeared on me.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. I want to thank Mr. Odette for the invitation. It's an honor and a privilege to come here and help kick off the Thought Leadership series. I also want to acknowledge the fine work of the OMA staff. Crossed every T, dotted every I, did a great job in getting me here and getting me started. The topic is a rather daunting topic, isn't it? When you think about it, the role of the physician in the 21st century. My talk will be brief. I promise it will be under 30 minutes or even less. And the idea is just to stimulate you, scare you a little bit, and perhaps motivate you to do some changes in both your individual behaviors professionally and what an organization such as OMA can do. So I mentioned to people that I was meeting earlier that this is a talk about horses. Are you ready for some horses? Sound, please.
This is unnecessary. The other reminds him that everything so far has made their lives easier. Remember all that farm work? Remember running from coast to coast delivering mail? Remember riding into battle? All terrible. These new city jobs are pretty cushy, and with so many humans in the cities, there will be more jobs for horses than ever. Even if this car thingy takes off, you might say, there will be new jobs for horses we can't imagine. But you, dear viewer from Beyond 2000, know what happened. There are still working horses, but nothing like before. The horse population peaked in 1915. From that point on, it was nothing but down. There isn't a rule of economics that says better technology makes more better jobs for horses. It sounds shockingly dumb to even say that out loud, but swap horses for humans and suddenly people think it sounds about right. As mechanical muscles pushed horses out of the economy, mechanical minds will do the same to humans. Not immediately, not everywhere, but in large enough numbers and soon enough that it's going to be a huge problem if we're not prepared, and we're not prepared.
So are we as a profession like the horses? Do we believe that more technology and better technology will make better jobs for physicians? That's the question I want to address today, and I want you all to think about. There's no question that the 21st century is bringing enormous changes and challenges to the field of medicine. And we all know that rapid advances in science and technology are at the very forefront. But there's something deeper beyond that I want to address. Not just advances in science and technology, but a profound cultural shift taking place in our civilization. And that our civilization is transitioning from the classic print-based industrial society to a technology-based internet society. Let me repeat that. We are making a transition from a print-based industrial society, which most of us grew up with and were comfortable in it, to a technology-based internet society. This is a game changer of the most profound proportions for any profession, as well as anyone living in this day and age. So what is the hallmark of this? What makes this different and unique from all the other changes that have taken place? We've had 3 previous industrial revolutions. I don't know if anybody's old enough to remember the steam engine. When that came around, electricity was big, and of course computers. But now we got something called the technologic convergence. It's fascinating to read about this technologic convergence, and you probably see bits and pieces in your practice lives now, but probably are not aware of the full extent of what is going on and how much it is changing things. All these items, and this is just a mini list of items, are learning to work together to converge in one powerful in-the-cloud platform. Look at the diverse things here: crowdsourcing, artificial technology, synthetic biology, all kinds of devices
sensors, networks and computers, telecom, apps, social networking, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All these things now are beginning to converge. And that's what's driving what is called the fourth industrial revolution, the technologic convergence, this internet-based, technologically based internet society. And this is such a game changer for all fields, and in particular, the field of medicine. So I was reading the New Yorker a couple months ago, which I enjoy reading from time to time, and there was an article written about a journalist who worked at The Guardian. It's a distinguished paper in England. And he said in there, our generation had been handed the challenge of rethinking almost everything societies had for centuries taken for granted about journalism. And I thought, okay, let's substitute medicine and see if that makes sense. Our generation had been handed the challenge of rethinking almost everything societies had for centuries taken for granted about medicine. Can I let that sink in for a minute or two? It's pretty deep. So the question is, how will medicine adapt? What will happen to the field of medicine? I believe that these changes in the technologic convergence are highly problematic for most traditional professions, but I think especially medicine. And it presents to our field, our beloved field, why we went into this field, at least 3 existential challenges. And I'll discuss each one separately. They are: 1, so what is the meaning of profession in the 21st century context? What does it mean to be a professional? What does it mean to be part of a profession in this context? 2, with all the information out there, what is knowledge? What exactly is knowledge? And how can it be managed and trusted, or I prefer the term curated? What is knowledge? How can it be managed and trusted or curated? And 3, what are the implications of the global patient? Maybe global isn't exactly the right term, but I mean the patient without walls. Patient, wherever that patient may be. No walls, no offices, no hospitals, or anything. So I see 3 existential challenges. You may see more than that, but these are the ones that I'm going to talk about today, of which I am greatly concerned. So here's the first challenge. So what is a profession in this 21st century context? When you think about it, for millennia, if you were a professional, you were the exclusive bearer of a body of knowledge. That was what you had. That's what you had to offer. And you hopefully applied that diligently in the care of people who sought your help. You were exclusive. You had that body of knowledge, and you put it to good use. So what's happening to this exclusivity today? Well, everybody knows that the amount of information out there in medicine is beyond what anyone can store in their brain. I was doing some research on Tinsley Harrison. Tinsley Harrison wrote the first edition of Harrison's Textbook of Internal Medicine. If there are internists in the audience, you probably have read it. The current version, I think, is the 18th, published in 2018. So in 1950, when he came out with this, even then, physicians couldn't master everything in that book. So the notion of exclusivity is limited. And it's true not only for knowledge, but also for skills. Skills that we find are increasingly being delivered by machines. And I think you're all familiar with some of these happening now, whether they might be pattern recognition, artificially intelligent smart machines, dermatology, pathology, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, or in the surgical field. The Da Vinci, I can't remember what generation is current in Da Vinci these days. Is it 4 or something like that? But, but that's only going to increase quite a bit. I was at a conference in San Diego a number of years ago at a institution called Singularity University. Never heard of it. I think it's I don't know if it's for-profit or not-for-profit, but it's sort of a technologically oriented organization that looks to see the future of technology, and they have a section on health and medicine. I went out there, and there was 800 people there, many of whom were brilliant technicians, many physicians, and their view was very eye-opening for me, which has led to putting together this talk, which is that physicians may become irrelevant in the future because of all the great technology that is happening and being developed. I found that frightening and shocking to the point where I volunteered to teach a session or lead a session at 9 o'clock at night on will we need physicians in the future? And there were 20 people who came out late at night to have the discussion. At the end, we took a vote, and I think 18 said we're not going to need physicians. So there's this very powerful technocratic component that's taking place with well-funded, a lot of money pouring into it, a lot of brilliant people, a lot of great ideas, some harebrained, most of which will fail. That's the tradition in these sorts of fields. But some will be successful. And the view is maybe physicians won't be as necessary as they are today. So I found that as a big wake-up call. Nevertheless, as a result of what's happening, both in knowledge and technology and everything, physicians are facing a loss of control. And maybe you feel that in your practice. I don't know if you do or not. But our roles and those of all the other health professionals who work with us or work independently are changing. And they're changing often imperceptibly and without the direct input and leadership of the profession itself. You know, were you involved in bringing the internet to medicine? Did you figure out how that was going to work? Did you design electronic medical records that would work for physicians? You know, it just sort of came in, and it's coming in imperceptibly, but yet it's having a profound effect on what we do every day, and it represents a loss of control, and that's continuing. The second existential crisis: what is knowledge, and how can it be managed and trusted or curated? You all know about the rapid expansion of the internet-based information. Presents such a fundamental challenge to the authority of the profession. I'm sure you're confronted every day with patients who have Googled this and Googled that and come in with a list of questions or things like that. Or perhaps even more, have gotten involved in a social network situation and crowdsource a solution to problems and things of this sort. You should do a casual search of any medical condition. Just try it when you have in your copious free time, a few minutes. I've done this, and you put in anything, lung cancer, thrombocytopenic purpura, doesn't matter, just put in something. Get hundreds of thousands of hits in a second or two. And the order of those hits is determined by apparently proprietary algorithms as part of the search engine that's run by these companies. It's not in order of what's most trusted. It's some other mysterious mechanism, sure related to revenue some way or another, and it just comes out. And we know that if you have 100,000 pages of a search, how many people go beyond the second page? Very few. So that, to me, is a very serious issue. As a result of all this stuff going on, the power of decision-making continues to shift toward the consumer. And that's both good and bad, because complicating this is the observation that people are predictably irrational in their decisions. You may be familiar with the Nobel Prize-winning work of Tversky and Kahneman on the framing effect, paper in Science, I think in 1980. The context is so important. So if a surgeon says to a patient, "I've got good news for you. We do this procedure, there's a 90% chance it's going to go beautifully and everything will go fine." Or the same surgeon can say, "Well, I want to warn you that if we do this procedure, there's a 10% chance that we could have a catastrophic outcome." That's the framing effect. And when you factor in how patients and people make decisions that are predictably irrational, how risk adverse are they, what are the connections, maybe it's genetic, who knows, It gets very, very complicated. So we're in a situation where there's so much information that's beyond what any of us can master. And I want to point out that information is different from knowledge. So a patient may come to you with information, but is that information actually knowledge? Knowledge management has traditionally relied in our field on journals, peer-reviewed journals, textbooks, professors, and experts, right? We read our journals faithfully, we go to meetings like this and other ones, we hear what our peers have to say. But social media and fake news are now dominating many platforms. What are we doing about it as an organization and as individuals? I believe our profession has not yet figured out how to manage knowledge in all these other contexts. It's like a runaway train. How can the health professions and this organization, OMA, step up to the plate to curate this information to remain as the trusted source? Curate, to select, organize, and present professional or expert knowledge. That's what we're all about. But we're facing a tsunami of information that's not knowledge. And we need to do something about that because it's a runaway train. Third, existential threat. What are the implications of the global patient, the patient without walls? So I like to describe this as medical care is evolving to deliver what I call the 4 C's. Care anywhere, wherever the patient happens to be. Could be in their car, could be on a vacation, could be in the country, could be anywhere in their home. Care by newly interdependent teams. We're more and more reliant on health professionals in other areas working with us to deliver care along a whole broad continuum. And some of these new members we haven't even created yet, but will be necessary in the future. I've already mentioned the 3rd C, care by machines. Got a lot to say about that. Too much for this talk, but there's a lot of sci-fi movies out in the last few years that deal with that. I got to pause for a minute and tell you the movie that started me on all this. I think it was 2013. There was a picture called Her, H-E-R. Has anyone seen that picture? H-E-R, a few of you have. I dragged my wife to it. I thought it might be interesting. She claimed because Scarlett Johansson was in it, that's why I was interested. Well, okay, I won't deny that. Anyway, the movie is set in some dystopian future where a miserable middle-aged guy, went through a breakup or something, gets a new operating system for his phone or whatever he's got, voiced by Scarlett, of course. And what happens in that movie is that he falls in love with her. And the question was to me, well, are humans capable of falling in love with machines? And I think the evidence is pointing toward a yes on that side of it. But do machines love you back? And what does that mean for the doctor-patient relationship? I'll talk about that in a little bit later as well. So that's care by machines. And there have been many other movies along those lines. 4th is care by probabilities. How skilled are we as clinicians in medical training, CME, et cetera, with statistics and probabilities? How well do we understand them? Take Watson, or something like Watson. It's got access to data points you wouldn't believe, right? Could have 10, 20, 30,000 data points on a patient, maybe 100,000 data points on a patient, depending on whether they're being monitored continuously, remotely, et cetera, and access to the world's literature, and maybe all the other patients with the same thing. And what do these machines come up with? They come up with a percentage, a probability, that patient X has a 0.85 probability of this diagnosis, or this result means that, or this result in some terms of probability or others. Well, we're moving toward care by probabilities. And how does a physician sit down with a patient and say, here's the probabilities, but here's what I think is the best course and why? How can I explain these in terms that a sick patient and family can understand? How can I be compassionate about probabilities? And how do I work that into what I mentioned earlier about people being predictably irrational? and having all kinds of different cultural and other contexts when you have a probability in front of you. Our probability training and understanding of statistics is woefully inadequate through medical school, and we're not trained in communicating these particularly well. Yet I think this is, if we're going to be relevant, I think this has to be a big part of our future. So these are the 4 C's, and you know, they're impacting all our medical organizations today. It's not happening in a vacuum. And I think most medical delivery organizations, small group practices, huge systems, whatever, are struggling to try to plan strategically to operationalize for this changing healthcare paradigm. It's all over the map and includes many things that I'm sure you're all familiar with. Would you be surprised to learn that one response has been more bureaucracy with new rules and regulations? Many, you know, someone said every time a new rule is put into place, an old rule should be discontinued. You know, does that ever seem to happen? They just sort of, you know, pile up. Everybody's feeling increased pressure on budgets for a whole variety of reasons, not just because of the technologic convergence, but for all the other things that are going on in society. Worldwide, we're seeing so many more partnerships, mergers, and other formulations amongst institutions and healthcare delivery systems and practices. I have a very good doctor in DC who's a GI doctor, general internist in GI, and he, small 5-group practice, joined a 75-group practice because it was too expensive and not efficient to do it any other way. I've seen situations where your mortal enemy health system across town, that hospital that was eating your lunch, now is your best friend. You know? So we're getting a crazy world of partnerships, mergers, and other things. As a result, the business models that many are using for care delivery are rapidly changing and evolving. And with all this going on, our role is changing too, and the relationships that we have with those who control various things. And to top it all off, our society is changing too, changing societal expectations and norms. Think about what your patients expect from you today compared to what they might have expected 5, 10, 15, 25 years ago. It's very different. So I'm going to present, in a nutshell, what I see as the problem. I don't laugh at this anymore because I think this is the problem. You know, we're all civic-minded. We all want to do the right thing. We all want to take better care of our patients. We want to have happy lives. We want to do all these things. But we can't put our head in the sand and let these changes happen to us without our input and our leadership. Or to put it another way, by and large, organizations and individuals seek to preserve the problem to which they should be the solution. It's called the Shirky Principle. I love it because I think it holds true at so many levels. You go to a meeting, say you're in a moderate-sized group or an organization, or it's an OMA subgroup or something. You're sitting around the table. You've got a new initiative you're excited about. You put it out there, and within 20 minutes of discussion, you can point around the table to those individuals who are seeking to preserve the problem to which they should be the solution. And your problem as the leader is to overcome that and figure out how to get things done. So there's a lot of institutional inertia here that we have to deal with. So let me just conclude with what I think, some ideas about what to do. This is not a laundry list, but there are some ideas. And I want to break it into 2 categories. One is what you might do as an individual in your professional life, when I think that would be cultivating some new skills, which is not easy sometimes, but becoming even more adept at some old ones. And then as part of a group like OMA or one of its subgroups of OMA, try to become effective in changing individual and organizational behaviors. That's the name of the game. So let's look at these a little more closely. So for the individual, the cultivation of some new skills, some of which I've hinted at already. A sharp focus on knowledge capture and curation, not just information retention. You all do this anyway, but I think you need to ramp it up. All this information is out there. How are you going to deal with it? How are you going to present it? And how are you going to make the judgment that this is valuable knowledge as opposed to fake news or just clutter that's out there. How do you maintain that sharp focus? Most of us who went through medical school, the focus was on information retention. You know, that's how you were tested and that's how you got things done. But I believe it's now much more important to capture that knowledge and curate it, not just remember it, because you can't remember it all. Secondly, how best do you want to collaborate with AI applications, artificially intelligent, smart applications? How can you as an individual, in your practice, in whatever you're doing, best work with machines? Have you thought about managing the machines? Or are they managing you? You know, which do you want to have happen? But to give some thought to, okay, we've got this interface now with machines out there. How am I going to manage them? How am I going to work with them? How can I best do that rather than be managed by them? And I mentioned earlier, understanding probabilities and communicating and applying them meaningfully to patients and their supporters. So the next patient and family that comes to you and there's a probability attached to something that some artificially intelligent thing, app or something came out with, how are you going to respond to that in a meaningful way and that works in the best interest of that patient? A real substantial challenge, and I think it's hard work for many of us to try to develop that skill. Now, I also mentioned the cultivation of some old skills. Well, here we go. Empathy and compassion in accordance with ethical standards. The late Joseph Campbell wrote The Power of Myth, had a very good, he said, you know, compassion is suffering with the patient, learning to suffer with the patient. Hippocrates is credited with having written, "It is more important to know what sort of person has a disease than to know what sort of disease a person has." And that famous Canadian William Osler said that medicine is a science of uncertainty and an art of probability. Is there something so unique about human-to-human interaction that's worthy of you devoting a lot of thought and attention and time to this element? As artificially intelligent platforms and digital technology and data points and all this other stuff come out, is there something here for you that's unique? Is there something special about human-to-human interaction that transcends everything else? And indeed, is this where we're going as a profession, back to where we were before scientific medicine came in, that it's all about this? It's something to think about. Now, I read an article recently that I was asked to review a grant, actually, from Singapore in an attempt to build a machine that would be able to read your emotions and communicate them back to you. And the layers of deep learning, it's neural network development in these computers and facial recognition and all that stuff, you plow through 62 pages of that with, you finish it and say, uh-oh, what does all this mean? And, is this speech today that I'm making about human-to-human interaction, is that going to become passé? Well, I don't believe it. We don't know that for sure. I mean, someday, somewhere, a computer will be smarter than the humans. What that means for society, that's a whole separate philosophical argument. But got to think about restoring the cultivation of empathy and compassion in medicine. Now for the group, like OMA, changing organizational culture and behaviors. As you know, most medical organizations are managed conservatively, are risk-adverse, and are staffed by highly accomplished individuals who tend not to view themselves as beholden to anyone else. Isn't that the way we were trained? If I'm a cardiac surgeon who's president of OMA, am I going to listen to somebody telling me, I'm doing something wrong about my patients or whatever? Probably not. That's the way we are. That's in our DNA. But how to bring about a meeting of the minds to begin to get things a little bit more on the table. So I believe there should be a meeting of the minds, and this is where I think organizations can do. Maybe this is a step for OMA to begin to do that, to create this meeting of the minds in a setting that facilitates a thoughtful and probing evaluation of the challenges posed. Now, this is an investment of time. Is there anyone here who's not busy? Is there anyone here who doesn't want to have more family life or whatever? No. But is this important enough to make it a priority? a willingness to put in the time and effort, an ability to be openly honest and introspective. And here are some agendas. If you were to have something like this, it could be a day or weekend, whatever, to ask yourself, is our organization effectively meeting today what we perceive as the 21st century challenges? Yes or no? And if not, what are they? 2, explore how your organization differs from other similar organizations. What is unique that you do that nobody else can do? 3, do not get sidetracked by a strong focus on finding outside models. I can't tell you the number of meetings I've gone to, and the first question is, can you tell me where they do this or that, or give me a model, or give me that? You know, it's useful only up to a point, but to get overwhelmed by it, this is a unique organization, a unique culture, unique individuals. Don't get sidetracked by that. But be willing to commit to reimagining every aspect of your practice, operations, and management. I know that's hard for you to do when you've been doing things so successfully for so long. This is the way we do it, right? Be committed to at least trying to reimagine it and what that means. Find some strategies to overcome that Shirky principle, inherent organizational inertia. Okay, we got all these ideas. How can we move it? What's blocking it? How do we get it out there? 6, endeavor to capture synergies between components that would be stronger if they were aligned and working together. You know, there's a lot of moving parts sometimes in organizations, aren't there? And often they're separate and not communicating. But often, if you put them together in some meaningful way, they make each other better. And that's something to think about. And finally, you need to identify a concrete plan for compassionate change. I say compassionate change because no one likes change when it affects them. Everybody likes it otherwise. Change is a good thing as long as it doesn't affect me. So as you put together plans for change, it's got to be compassionate. How can that be good for everybody? Just a few caveats to conclude. Do not assume in these meetings that reasonable individuals will share your new goals and priorities. That rarely happens. Rarely, rarely happens. You have to come up with, you have to be sensitive to the fact that people have other goals, other priorities, and how do they mesh with what you're trying to do. Become effective in managing 360. The people around you, the people above you, the people below you, everybody has to be involved in a strategy for change. And back up your idea with a real implementation strategy. How many times have I seen brilliant strategic plans? That's all they are. You can go see them on the shelf or on the computer. Nothing ever happens with them. Need an implementation strategy. As an individual participant in a group meeting, leave your ego at the door. You are not the best and smartest person in the room. And be willing to demonstrate that you're going to give something up to make this happen. I don't know what that is, as long as it's not money. Don't make it money, because that's got problems. You're willing to give something else up. An example might be 2 big health systems. They're going to give up their liver transplant program because, you know, it's more efficient or whatever. And on the individual level, there are many other ways to think about that. And keep mission balance in mind. You can't drive through a singular mission unless it's balanced, that every component works. And that's the tricky thing to do. Please, avoid endless arguments about physician payment. This is the quote I always say. There are many mechanisms for paying physicians. Some are good and some are bad. The 3 worst are fee-for-service, capitation, and salary. You know, please. You're not going to make a lot of progress in this one. It's going to be tough. But you got to address it, but don't get overwhelmed by it, and don't let it become endless arguments. So this is where I hope we're not here at this point today. But I firmly believe that, you know, if not now, when? I mean, you know, it's getting late. Things are happening rapidly. That technologic convergence is moving ahead. That information mill is out there. Social media is ramping up. The technology is blossoming. There are all these great companies that are producing things that you haven't had any input to that are going to affect you. All this stuff is going on. I would urge in the strongest possible terms for OMA to consider taking the lead in being proactive and not so reactive to the changes that are happening. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wartman, for a very illuminating presentation and for setting the stage to help us talk about how we need to start looking at the future of this organization as we prepare, yet again, for the changes that are going to come in the 21st century. So now I'm going to hand things over to Dr. Samantha Hill. She's the president-elect, of course. She's your president-elect. I consider Samantha Hill to be a personal friend of mine. I'm enormously proud of all the work that she's accomplished in her short career. She likes to proclaim herself as a Gen X type and will bring that change mantra to the organization when she takes over in the spring. She is a cardiac surgeon. For those of you who don't know, she's a cardiac surgeon in Toronto. And for those of you who also don't know, she's actually the winner of the Fitzgerald Teaching Award in 2017. So with that, come on up.
Thank you so much, Sohail. Borderline Gen X. Very inspiring. Thank you, Dr. Wartman. I'm really excited to be up here today moderating this panel and the discussion for our inaugural OMATalks. I think the OMATalks as a concept is brilliant, and I'm excited to see where we go from here. I'm looking forward to a stimulating hour of conversation. Hopefully most of it will be coming from you guys and not from us up here. Welcome to 2019. We have the, at times, dubious honor of living in a world that has experienced more technological advance in the last decade than in the last century. We're on the cusp of sustainable and affordable solar energy. We have phones with more power than the computers that launched the lunar shuttle. We expect to live longer than our grandparents could have dreamed of. We have immunotherapy, we have gene modulation. Today's panel is all about how we as physicians fit into that change. But it isn't just about technology and medicine that are advancing rapidly. So are society, equity, and diversity. It's the era of hashtag her story, hashtag women who lead, hashtag no more Manels. And with that in mind, you can't see the rest of the panel here. They were all supposed to be up here when we wrote this part. But we acknowledge the lack of gender diversity on this panel. The OMAI are acutely aware. You as the audience should know that we did invite several women, rock star researchers and physicians in the field to take part in today's panel, but life is what it is, and we just couldn't make it work for today. That said, they're interested, and we are interested in having people come and speak to us later at other events. And furthermore, we at the OMA are going to work on a plan to have future OMA talks that focus on the issue of gender gap and other issues related primarily to female physicians. So all that to say, I'm begging you, please don't tweet out another Manel, no more Manels tweet from the OMA for today. Give us this once. That said, I'm excited to introduce the talent up here that we do have today. We're privileged to have very distinguished panelists, international leaders in their field, the fields of artificial intelligence and data mining. We're proud to have them based here in Toronto, and I, for one, am really excited about these presentations. As a resident in cardiac surgery, I had the privilege of caring for an elderly patient on a left ventricular assist device. He and his wife were delighted to be able to leave the hospital after a dramatic course that 5 or 10 years before that would have killed him. The LVAD was half the size of the hospital bed, even on wheels, weighed more than I did. His life was forever changed. We were all grateful to technology that let him leave the hospital alive. We knew he was going to essentially be housebound, but better housebound than hospital-bound, and again, alive. The great thing about cardiac surgery residency is it goes on nearly forever, and you get to see patients over and over again. A few years later, I get a phone call from Emerge. Same patient is on his way back in. I recognize the name. The LVAD had failed. His elderly wife was hand cranking the system to keep him conscious. They were rushing in an ambulance, and no one knew what to do. The team meets him at the ambulance door. We rush him into the OR. We successfully swap out his LVAD to a newer, smaller model. This one's the size of a really large briefcase. He left the hospital again, and we're still really excited. He's still alive. He's still leaving the hospital. Now he's kind of mobile. This thing can be rolled around. Today, the world's smallest LVAD is placed within the aortic valve. It's an implantable pump. It's 21 millimeters and 27 grams. It approximates systole and diastole, so you actually get blood pressure changes. and it can produce a flow of 5 liters per minute, basically enough for almost everyone in this room. We are living the futuristic dreams of the movies of my youth. In a recent article that caught my interest as a cardiac surgeon, but I'm sure will get everyone's attention here, a colleague described a potential paradigm shift that was heading our way. Intensive care units with real-time analytics displayed instead of heart rate and blood pressure. Deep learning in the form of recurrent neural networks that support personalized decisions. Automatic recordings of conversation with natural language processing, so no one ever has to enter anything into an EMR again. Robotic processes, automated for admissions. Echocardiograms that are at least electronically assisted in reading, etc. Pharmacotherapy informed by pharmacogenetic profiles. We're almost there at this future. He continues on. What I realize is that we, as the physician of the 21st century, are working in an environment that the physician of the 20th century could never have imagined. And the future is looking to continue to change at an exponential level. So the question for this room, the question for us as a profession, is are we ready? With that in mind, it's my pleasure to introduce our panelists, Dr. Frank Rudzicz and Dr. Mohammad Mamdani. I'm so sorry, Dr. Mohammad Mamdani. You guys like to come up? Both of whom are at St. Michael's Hospital, now part of the Unity Health Toronto network. We'll hear first from Dr. Mohammad Mamdani, the Vice President of Data Science and Advanced Analytics at Unity Health Toronto. He's also director of the network's Shing Center, where he supports data scientists to work with advanced analytic approaches such as artificial intelligence, leveraging hospital data to identify and solve healthcare issues. He's also a professor at the University of Toronto. He authors hundreds of research studies, and in 2010 was named one of Canada's top 40 under 40 for his research. After that, we'll hear from Dr. Frank Rudzicz, a scientist at the International Center for Surgical Safety of St. Michael's Hospital. Focuses on machine learning in healthcare, especially natural language processing, speech recognition, and surgical safety. He's also a director of AI at Surgical Safety Technologies and a faculty member of the Vector Institute for Artificial Intelligence and the University of Toronto. He's the recent recipient of the Young Investigator Award from the Alzheimer's Society of Canada and the Keynote Innovation Award. Rudzicz and his colleagues use and develop a surgical black box that uses data from the operating room to help reduce distractions and errors during surgery. Thank you very much. I'd like to invite Mohammad up to the podium.
Thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I have to say I'm a little upset, though. It's awful to have to follow a really eloquent, articulate, thoughtful speaker. As a speaker myself, I hope to follow somebody who's absolutely terrible, because then it's so much easier to do a good job. So, Frank, I'm about to make your job really easy. It's a pleasure to be here. I've been asked to speak a little bit about this whole AI thing people keep hearing about. You've heard a little bit about how transformative technology and AI is going to be. And I think a lot of us in healthcare say, sure, I'm just going to keep doing my job. It's all hype. It'll go away. That's kind of what the retail sector said a while back, right? How many people shop on Amazon? That's pretty much transformed how we shop these days, hasn't it? You can buy almost anything online. And it's magical how when you pop on, it just kind of knows what you want to buy next. How do they do that? And of course, taxi drivers, they've been upended by Uber, right? And so now the Uber drivers are happy until the self-driving cars come on board. The transportation industry is being upended and radically changing. Of course, the largest hotel chain in the world is not Marriott, it's Airbnb. And that's driven by technology. And it's also magical how when you go on Airbnb, it kind of learns where you'd feel really comfortable, and it makes these suggestions, and a lot of times it's kind of right. How did they do that? A lot of industries are being retooled, reshaped, transformed. We're next. Healthcare seems to lag behind a lot of other industries, but I believe it's coming. Technology and artificial intelligence, I think, is going to reshape how we do business. So what is AI? Do people have a fairly decent understanding of what this AI thing is? How many people know what AI is? How many people have kind of heard about it but really don't really know much about it? Yeah. So if we go to the almighty Google Dictionary, the source of all truth, it is defined as the theory and development of computer systems able to perform tasks that normally require human intelligence, such as visual perception, speech recognition, decision-making, and translation between languages. For many, this is all garble. Basically, it's a lot of math. It's really advanced math. And we're using math and data to figure out solutions to problems. So if you really step back and think about it, by strict definitions, how many people can calculate 2,424 times 812 divided by 6 in about 3 seconds or less? Not many people, right? It would be magical if you could. It's called a calculator. It's been around for a long time. And some people would say a calculator is AI. It's really to speed up calculations of things that we would normally be able to do or should be able to do. But I'll take it one step further. I think it can do things that we have trouble doing. How do computers learn? Well, we need data. Lots and lots of data. We need places to store the data, and we need the ability to process that data really quickly. And I would also argue these things called neural networks and machine learning algorithms, they've been around since the 50s and 60s. Our ability to store and process data has really, really changed recently, and that's enabling some of these really incredible methods to come to light now. But I would argue that one of the most powerful things that drives computer learning is who its teacher is. How do computers learn? Well, they learn from people like you. Whether you like it or not, there are systems that actually look through data to understand how you practice as a physician, how nurses practice, how then outcomes are shaped. All of that gets learned by the computer. They say AI has the intelligence of an 8-year-old. So you don't want to give an 8-year-old a pair of scissors and tell it to go. You've got to tell it, here's how you hold it. Please don't run, but if you're going to run, run slowly. You want to give it some guidance and directions, right? But it's an 8-year-old that never forgets anything. And that is really powerful. So I thought about giving a whole bunch of examples, how, there's stuff out there and it's coming. And I thought, why don't we just start at home? I think we're doing some pretty neat, innovative things right here in Canada. And at Unity Health Toronto, I've recently been appointed as Vice President of Data Science and Advanced Analytics. I think that's the first of its kind in the country because we are putting some serious investment in this space. We believe it's the future. So we're embracing artificial intelligence, AI, advanced analytics. We've created the most advanced hospital-based applied AI program in the country. We made a $15 million investment, not $15, $15 million investment to set up good data infrastructure, analytics infrastructure, and we've hired a whole team of data scientists who are quite good at what they do. Of course, there's lots of collaborations, including the Vector Institute, U of T, folks like Stanford, Google, MIT, Microsoft. A lot of people with a lot of brain power and the right infrastructure, I think we can do some pretty magical things. But it's not just about the servers and the data and the people. It's about the community. Because to Dr. Wartman's point, you got to be able to really implement these things, right? Because if you don't, it's just a nice academic paper and what could be type of discussion. So our rule at our place is the data scientists can't ask the questions. Questions can't come from them. The worst thing you can do, in my opinion, is get a data scientist to ask hard clinical questions. They don't know the environment. The worst thing you can get a clinician to do is try to build a neural net. Unless they've got background in the space, sure, but then vice versa. I think the best thing you can do is get them in a room together. So we have a team of great data scientists and some affiliate data scientists. We surround them with clinicians, with doctors, with nurses, with pharmacists. We have patients on some of our projects. We surround them with management folks who know the operations of the hospital. They ask the questions. They define the parameters, and they say, here's what I'm struggling with, here's what I need fixed. And they commit to working with our team for 3 to 6 months on most projects to develop these solutions together. And they become the champions for implementation. And that can be pretty powerful. So I'm just going to go through a couple of examples just to give you a sense of the types of things we do. We have over 25 of these projects that we work on at any point in time. But one of the challenges was emergency department wait times. So our emerge folks came to us and they said, look, here's our problem. Every year we get 2 to 3 of these major patient surges, and it just throws things out of whack. Every month we get 2 to 3 mini surges, and it causes chaos. It's not the end of the world, but it causes chaos. It would be awesome if we could predict and knew in advance how many patients are going to come to our emerge. You can do that, right? And we said, yeah, sure. So what we did was we grabbed 3 years of our historical data, looked at that. We scraped in weather data. So is there going to be a snowstorm tomorrow night? We scraped in city planning data. So are the Raptors playing at the Scotiabank Arena tomorrow night? Is there a marathon happening on Lakeshore Boulevard on Sunday? All of that data comes in. And we've created these algorithms that update. Currently, they update every evening, but we're setting it very shortly to update every few hours, where it will tell you how many patients we expect to see. So today is Friday. We can tell you Monday from noon to 6, there will be 82 patients in the emerge. 10 of them will have mental health issues. 12 of them will be high intensity. The rest, maybe not so bad to manage. Pretty neat. We can do this with over 90% accuracy. We've been using this at St. Mike's for the past 6 months or so. We've already implemented this at Michael Garron and Mount Sinai Hospital as well. And there's another 2 hospitals that are coming in the next couple of months. So these aren't pipe dreams. These are actually happening. This was hoped to decrease wait times and improve the quality of care. What this will do is really help us say, well, maybe we need to bring in another nurse, shift the physician schedule around a bit to meet the demand. Another example is something more operational, where we have nurse resource team issues. So NRT, the concept here is we've got over 1,600 nurses just at St. Mike's, and nurses get sick. They go on vacation, mat leave, pat leave. When they go, you get another nurse and you pay them overtime, or you go to an external agency, pay them a ridiculous amount of money, and they come in without any experience at our hospital to take care of our patients. The concept is, instead of spending money there, why don't you create an internal pool of nurses, like a floater pool, and they'll just relieve, and you can pay them the regular amount. The problem is, how big do you make that nurse pool? And when we ask our lead, great guy, so AJ, how many nurses do you have in your NRT? We got 22 nurses. So how'd you come up with 22? It feels right. And so we want to get away from that, right? So we said, well, can we look at the patterns of leaves? And it's magical. When we looked at historical patterns of when nurses get sick, when they go on vacation, when they take leaves, it's crazy. Mother's Day, Halloween, Thanksgiving, Valentine's Day, magically they're sick days. When a vacation gets declined, you become sick. Incredible. There's some pretty neat patterns there. So what we did was we said, let's forecast what we expect to see over the next year, give it to our operations research engineer, develops an optimization model and says, actually, the number isn't 22, it's 37. And here's a breakdown between critical care nurse versus non-critical care nurse. And we created an entire tool. And when we optimize and build in the right mix, at St. Joe's and St. Mike's, we've already implemented this. It's expected that we'll save about $1 million a year, just in terms of optimizing our nurse staffing. That'll reduce cost, and we're hoping it'll actually improve the quality of care, because then we get nurses who know our hospital. The last example I'll give is around predicting outcomes in patients. So our internists came to us, and they say the statistic we have at our hospital, and it's probably similar at other hospitals, 1 out of 13 patients in our internal medicine will either die or need intensive care. And we said, okay, so what do you want us to do about it? They said, well, by the time we realize a person's crashing, on average, we have about 3 hours to react. And that's not enough time. If we had 12 hours or 24 hours, that would be fantastic, because we could monitor more carefully, we could actually pay attention, we could do all sorts of things. In fact, there's a trial in the UK that if you do early intervention, you can reduce cardiac arrest and mortality by about 30% or so. But you need that lead time. So they asked us, so you do these fancy schmancy things, can you guys create an AI algorithm that'll tell us if a person's going to die in 24 hours? And then they laughed, and we said, yeah, probably. What we did was we created this algorithm. It uses something called an ensemble model, where there's a whole bunch of these machine learning models that come into play. And what it does is every few hours, for all of our internal medicine patients, it grabs data. labs, medications, vitals, orders. We have it looking through the text notes of the doctors and the nurses to look for word patterns. And it calculates if the patient is going to die or go to the ICU in the next 24 to 48 hours. And it works pretty well. There's over 98% accuracy. Now, of course, people will say, well, the docs are great, our clinicians are fantastic. And of course, clinicians will say that, and we need to understand, well, maybe you are better. And to get you to change behavior, you need to have trust in this thing. So we spent an entire summer, and we asked our doctors, nurses, and residents, so what do you think? Is this patient going to die or go to the ICU? We have over 4,000 clinician predictions, and we've compared it to the AI algorithm. The AI algorithm doesn't do a little better. It does a lot better. But this is what the clinicians needed to have faith and trust in this algorithm. So right now, this is actually live and running. It's in silent phase right now. We're seeing if there's any tech issues or anything like that, but the algorithms work. After this short silent phase, it will be live and running, working with our docs 24/7. So it's not, it is coming, it's here. Now, there are some realities of AI in healthcare. There's a human factor, there's a non-human factor. There's a nice study that was published from Europe, which looked at febrile urinary tract infections. So the thought here was, okay, a patient comes in, febrile UTI, you give them an antibiotic and you send them home, or you admit them. What do? So they created this fairly rudimentary risk prediction tool that would tell you, okay, for this patient, send them home or admit them. And they did a cluster randomized trial, and I can't remember the exact number of sites. I thought it was like 30 or something like that. But they randomized these sites. First arm was to standard of care, just basically do what you do. The second arm was use this tool. There was very little oversight in terms of how people were using the tool. But what they found was that in the arm that used the tool, hospital admissions decreased significantly. That's great, right? Well, the number of people who came back because of bad effects increased fourfold in the tool group. So the tool was actually harming people, not helping them. Had you not done the trial, you wouldn't have known. Now, one would argue the tool wasn't that great. Others would argue the implementation wasn't that great. But the two go hand in hand. And so lots of questions come up. What is a good model? As clinicians, are you ready to look at a deep learning model or an AI tool or something and say, no, I believe it or I don't? Do you know how they're created or the mechanics of it or the process that's went through to actually validate the models? A lot of times we won't know, right? Unintended consequences. In our model where we predict ICU transfer or death, we've already done the due diligence to know that we outperform the clinicians. Implementation is a different world. We're going to be keeping a very close eye on things. Because what we could possibly see is the alarm going off, people getting nervous, and you get more intensive care unit visits rather than less. We'll see how it happens. And of course, there's legal ethical issues. What if you've got this algorithm and it tells you somebody's going to die in the next 48 hours? And using your clinician judgment, you say, no, they're not. And then they die. Who gets sued? All sorts of those issues come up. These are all the discussions we've been having literally for the past year as we keep thinking about implementation. How do we get this into practice? And these are all sorts of issues that will need to be worked out. There are no real solid answers right now. There's guidance, but we're all learning. And the point I want to make is we're learning because the technology is here. Yeah? And at that end, I just want to leave you with those thoughts that I do believe that this new world we're in is not just a bubble that's going to pop. It's not something that's going to go away. We're going to have to learn how to embrace it, as Dr. Wartman had really eloquently pointed out. And I look forward to the discussion. So thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I told you it was going to be a good talk. Next up, we have Dr. Rudzicz. If you'll come to the podium, please.
Thank you. So my name is Frank, and I'm a computer scientist. I've been working in machine learning in healthcare since before it was cool. So I really love the area, and as such, I'm thrilled that we get to have these conversations now, these cross-disciplinary conversations. Out of curiosity, are there any other computer scientists in the room? Okay, not yet, maybe next year. So I'm thrilled that we're having these conversations, but I'm also sensitive to a few things. I'm sensitive to the idea sometimes that we computer scientists are pushing technology onto people in other disciplines, in particular in healthcare. I'm aware that people don't like medical records, and I don't want AI to be the next medical record. So it's so crucial for me that our work is sort of driven by the pull, that clinicians are telling us what they need, and we just simply respond to that need. The second thing that I'm sort of sensitive to is how the realities of machine learning are sometimes lost in the hype. So I'm going to present some numbers which are hopefully impressive. We often hear impressive numbers coming out of machine learning, but it's also important to realize that these machines aren't always perfect, and we need to be able to identify problems when they occur and really interpret them as well. So we have to not, I like saying we should not drink the Kool-Aid, but we can kind of sip it. I'm sensitive also to having to wear a tie. In computer science, usually we wear shorts and T-shirts and stuff like that, so having to be here with a tie on this costume is pretty silly. So I'm going to talk to you mostly about something that kind of answers a lot of these sensitivities. So I'm the director of AI at Surgical Safety Technologies, which is a company that's spinning out of St. Mike's, and I'm a scientist at the academic lab that's spinning it out. But I'm also a faculty at the Vector Institute, where we have a large group of really great people who are doing work in machine learning and healthcare. Beyond what I'm going to talk about, so including things like reducing bias in healthcare models that are being deployed and so on. So I'll be happy to talk about that a bit later too. So basically, despite the fact that surgery is very high risk, the operating room, and despite all the new technology going into the operating room, the OR is still actually a very poorly understood environment in healthcare. The drapes go on, the doors shut, and not very much data really comes out of the operating room. So the idea of surgical safety technologies is basically that if we get a comprehensive objective analysis of team performance and other activity that goes on in the operating room, we'll be able to improve the patient outcomes and patient experience, enhance the morale of staff in and around the operating room, crucially reduce errors, reduce costs, and ultimately save lives. So the founder of the organization, Theodor Grantcharov, basically wants to do with surgery what the airline black boxes have done to improve safety in the airline industry. So basically what we have is something called the OR black box. It's not an actual box yet, but it's a collection of sensors which are placed around the rooms of our partners. These sensors include video cameras. We usually have 3 or 4 of them on the walls around the room. Microphones in the walls around the room. A lot of our work involves endoscopic cameras or laparoscopic cameras. A lot of the earlier work was in wearable tech, so heart rate monitors. We're doing some new work with EEG caps to monitor sort of the mental state of the team. A lot of patient physiology, obviously, some other environmental factors, including the outside environment. So we're interested in the medical record as well, and other devices in the room. We aggregate all of this information in a secure manner, usually on a server that sits on the site of our partners. And then out of the black box, we get a variety of outcomes, including assessments of risks and hazards. We can analyze threats and resilience, so threats to safety before they happen. We can assess surgical team performance, assess surgical technology itself. So we're actually working with some major companies that produce the hardware, so we can help them assess their technology, and generally assess the efficiency. There's more that didn't fit on this slide, but these are the main kind of outcomes we're interested in. So far the black box is being deployed around the United States, Canada, and Europe, and we have some partners in South America also. So to the first sensitivity, as a computer scientist, this is kind of the first time I've really felt that there's a need being identified, and they think that the need can be solved by machine learning and artificial intelligence. So I don't feel like I'm pushing this deep learning stuff onto them, but really they're asking for deep learning to make sense of all of these sensory information. So one of the first crucial, so I'm going to talk about a small handful of our projects. We have just over a dozen projects or products in the AI team of surgical safety technologies. So I'll talk about a few of them. The first one is preserving privacy. So most of the hospitals we deploy to, it's crucial that if we identify errors or problems with efficiency, we don't single out any individual as the cause of those challenges. So we apply machine learning to obfuscate various things in the scene. So this shows public clips. So this isn't our partner data, obviously. But we've applied our neural network algorithms to identify faces and simply blur them out. In the actual data, we also blur out the bodies, so we kind of draw a mask around the bodies, and we can recolor it if the scrubs are a certain color, if there's tattoos that are visible, or a cap that has a certain distinguishing characteristic. There's a lot more work to be done. So currently, we don't detect like posters on the wall or clocks on the wall. If you're in a hospital and you can kind of see that kind of information in the scene, you can kind of use auxiliary databases to kind of re-identify what's going on in the room. You can say, I know this is OR8, and I know that the height of this person is very tall, so I know who this individual is. So what we have now is the AI module kind of feeding into a bank of human analysts who take the output and correct any of the errors that occur. We don't really show any errors in this clip, but the primary source of error is these false positives. So typically in our data, you'll see sort of a hallucinated blob in a corner of a room or something where the neural network thinks a person is, and it'll scrub that out. So those errors occur. The clinicians say sometimes seeing these blurred areas is a bit distracting when they're trying to get a sense of what's going on in the scene. But for us, the AI team, we want to be very conservative. We'd much rather have these false positives and false negatives where a face is visible. So a lot of our work involves team efficiency. So this is the kind of analysis we can provide with the cameras that are around the room. So again, another kind of neural network can identify bodies, actually very similar to the one that was shown in the last slide. You can get a skeletonization of the individuals in the scene. And then therefore also create a 3D map of the room. So we can kind of look for, over the course of the several hours of a surgery, we can see if there's any traffic jams, inefficiencies in the way the room is set up, for example. Different hospitals have different kinds of bespoke requests for us, often involving a few hundred or so statistics we can pull out of this kind of data. We also have microphones, so in the kind of the holistic view of the room, we can also sort of listen to different pockets of the room using arrays of microphones. And there we can identify a couple of things. We can identify stress. So if an individual is particularly stressed, typically that's revealed through their tone of voice. But not always. There's some difficulties. Some surgeons we work with are very emotional, and it's very obvious when they're upset. But others, when they get upset, they get really quiet and really logical sounding. So there's no one-size-fits-all model for that task. So we have to adapt it. One project I'm really interested in, as someone who kind of worked a lot in natural language processing, is something called pragmatics and uncertainty. So we can also listen to the kinds of conversations that are going on and identify if there's breakdowns in communication. So if somebody asks a question and maybe there's some phonological ambiguity, so the person can't quite hear what is said because of the blaring music that the surgeon is playing, or they're not sure what the next step in the procedure is, for example, we're interested in kind of listening in and seeing if we can improve performance through communication. And I think finally, this is the kind of slide that you never see in computer science conferences, but I started going to surgical conferences and I was very alarmed. But I assume this is okay with you. So obviously there's good performance and there's bad performance, as you can see in these kind of extreme examples. So kind of the final thing I want to talk about is looking at video streams from laparoscopic and endoscopic cameras and automatically sort of doing what humans on our team used to do, which is kind of give a score. We typically look at OSATs as a structured score of a technical skill. And we can do that with neural networks also. So there's two basic approaches to this. One is end-to-end, which is kind of the most popular way that people do machine learning these days, where we cut the human out of the loop entirely. We just feed raw videos in as input, and then the output is whatever score we want to receive. And then the neural network learns the correspondences that way. That's a very popular approach in the computer science community. Partially because when you compare it against all other models, the accuracies or precisions and recalls tend to be higher. So everyone wants to get maximum performance. So these end-to-end models that don't have the human in the loop anywhere have been doing really well recently. But the problem is they're not really interpretable, which I'll get to in a moment. So the alternative is to kind of identify things in the scene, like the bowel grasper and the needle driver, identify those first, compute some statistics about like the jitter of those tools or the position of those tools, and then use those statistics to do the downstream task. And so therefore we can describe a little bit about what's going on in the scene. So far, if we had humans label these videos with OSAT scores, and then we train these neural networks to predict what a human would give on new data, we're about between 88 and 100% in agreement with what humans would give. So this idea is we can get a pretty good idea of whether the technical skill is good or not so good using neural networks. But also, this basically frees up a lot of the work that humans on our team had to do. So humans had to do all this work manually. Now we're trying to pick the low-hanging fruit with these neural networks, which is very scalable, do the pre-processing first, and leave the humans to do some of the more deep analytics that they really makes use of their domain expertise. So I wanted to point this out. So AI still makes a ton of mistakes. So 99%, even 100% sounds good, but it's not exactly 100%. It's like 99.5% accurate. I mentioned with the task where we're blurring out faces, we have to balance false positives against false negatives. And what we'd really like is a way to interrogate the neural network and identify why it's making the decisions in the first place. So here's kind of 4 examples of outputs of our older tool on bleeding detection. So we can also identify where bleeding is or thermal injury or that sort of thing. And so down here in the lower left-hand corner is a true positive of bleeding occurring, but there's this false positive on the right where there's lots of redness but no actual bleeding. So what we'd like is a tool that would kind of listen to the neural network and identify these are the pixels that are most useful to the neural network when it's making its decision. I can't get into detail right now because I think I'm a bit over time already, but we've published in JAMA Surgery a few months ago sort of a rough sketch of our strategy with regards to how we can use explainable artificial intelligence to promote safe intraoperative decision support. So finally, there's this quote from Vinod Khosla, who's a venture capitalist in California who invests a lot in companies that do AI and medicine. And here's this quote: technology will replace 80% of what doctors do, and he never really clarified what that 80% actually is. I have a sense that it might be something like charting or filling out consult notes or EMR data. But I don't think this is the right perception or the right idea. In a lot of studies, we compare human performance against machine performance. And machine performance is getting better really quickly. So this snippet on the left is from an NIH report from a few years ago, where like the best AI system that, for detecting cancer made errors about 7.5% of the time, which was the best at the time. But this number is getting much, much smaller. It's approaching human performance. And in some tasks in different domains, the machine is becoming more accurate than some of the humans that were available. But usually that's not the case. Usually humans are still the best. But the trick is that if you combine the output of these neural networks and other machine learning models in judicious ways and give them to humans to really do the deeper analysis on the output of those algorithms, the combined error goes down quite a bit. So AI plus humans is better than either on their own. So I think a better quote than this one that we can all use is that technology won't replace us, but technology will augment about 80% of what we do. There's a real opportunity for us to just get rid of some of the low-hanging fruit and really help out, improve efficiencies, and help you all do what you do best. So I think AI and machine learning are finally, I've been doing this for a long time, and now we have all these really great results coming out, so we can have the opportunity to put machine learning into practice in real life, which is extremely motivating, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity. And there's some more pull now, so it's not just computer scientists pushing their tools onto everyone else, but there's actually a pull for this technology, which is very gratifying also. But crucially, we have to not drink the Kool-Aid. We have to be very careful that neural networks are not completely understandable, even by people who say they understand them entirely. So when we're implementing them, we have to be very careful that we can interrogate them, that we can identify sources of error, and we don't just turn things over blindly to these neural networks. So I think we can promote safety in surgery and in other disciplines also using these tools. But as we're doing so, we have to make sure that the tools themselves are safe as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that fabulous talk. And with that, I'd like to turn the floor over to questions from the audience. We'll alternate between the microphones. There are 2 microphones, one over there to my right and one to my left, opposite for you. There was a question, but I didn't hear it, and it wasn't from a mic. Okay, the question was how many people use an Isabel platform for a diagnosis? I'm not sure if that was directed at the audience or at the raise of hands. I see one. All right, so we're going to move on to the microphone, and it's Dr. Jim Wright, who's probably the last person I will be able to name by name, so please don't hold that against me. Go ahead, Jim.
So just to partially reassure Dr. Wartman, the OMA board's already approved today in the spring where we're going to look at reimagining the physician role in the 21st century. So we've already got that in early planning. But I want to draw out this distinction between augmentation and replacement. So technology is largely viewed currently as how it's going to improve what physicians do and improve the outcomes of patients. But in fact, the first speaker, Dr. Wartman, is talking about replacing physicians, and Eric Topol has made the case that it'll be deep medicine, that we need to return to the roots of patient-doctor interaction and empathy. But in fact, Susskind and Susskind make a case that computers are actually going to do that better than humans. And they cite some early research to say that not only do computers perhaps do it better, but patients actually prefer talking to computers more than they do talking to patients because they feel like they're not being judged by a human. So I just want to draw out this distinction between replacement and augmentation because I think it's a really important point as we go forward.
Microphones? Can we get the microphones on, please?
Thank you.
I think that's a really good point. I have a interesting view of this. I read somewhere, and I can't remember where. But think about this for a minute. The role of AI in medicine is to keep unnecessary variation out. To keep unnecessary variation out. The role of the physician is to keep unnecessary variation in. I think that says volumes about that point.
Thank you. We'll turn to microphone 2.
Hello, good afternoon. This is an excellent series of talks, and my name is Dr. Abokwanyere. I'm a delegate from District 6, Durham Medical Society. I have a question for Dr. Mamdani. I'm actually fascinated about the things you have implemented in St. Michael's Hospital, particularly actually two things. The prediction of how many patients will come through emergency department. Were your predictions right? That's my first question. Number 2 is with the nursing float pool and correcting for overtimes and nurses being away. Were you able to get positive results with that? I ask because I work in a place where we're actually struggling with that right now. So I'm very interested in how you manage that and how you saved money for your hospital.
Sure. So I'll comment on both. The first was around the emergency department volume forecasting tool in terms of are we getting it right? So we actually do keep a track of performance metrics, and the error rate is typically between 4 to 6%. So we are typically 94 to 96% accurate on our volumes. There are always glitches. Like I remember there was one day where we had never seen that high volume in the history of the emerge, and so it didn't quite capture that. So it'll miss every now and then. But by and large, yeah, we're about, let's say on average, 95% accurate. And we have about 6 months of data where we've actually compared actuals to predictions to get that accuracy estimate. The funny part is when we implemented the other 2 hospitals, we've also looked at performance there, and it's about the same. Now what we're doing is we'll be implementing at Sault Ste. Marie. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say that publicly, but I guess I just did. And at St. Joe's here in Toronto as well. I'm really interested to see how it performs in a rural setting. And there's another group out in BC, in Vancouver, who would like to use it as well, and we're entertaining if we can put it out there as well. The way we design it is a geotag, so it actually pulls data on what's local rather than just the center of the University of Toronto. And in terms of the second question with respect to nurse staffing optimization with the NRT, we've implemented it at 2 hospitals. Fingers crossed, so far so good. The challenge has been that it doesn't happen overnight, because what happens is, if you go from 22 to 37 nurses, first you got to hire those nurses. then you have to have the right mix, then you have to have some additional training. So it's probably about a 6 to 12 month process. And then you start to see the financial benefits. So we're just starting to see those now. And again, so far so good. We're on track to save the estimated amounts.
Thank you. We'll go back to microphone 1.
Thank you, Samantha. So I guess my question has to do about EMR and data harvesting. And I've talked a little bit with Michelle about the Utopian project. But we really sit on a gold mine of information here. But we need to get it to you, the scientists, in a way that you can take that gold mine and really deliver on how we're going to practice, right? And so when I talk to Michelle, I see the inability for physicians to really see the ability to network together, to see the power of their EMR when we network 1 million EMRs or 40,000 EMRs together, and what power that will give you as a thought scientist that can come back to us as a clinician to really drive and shape and transform healthcare, which is what we're here to talk about. So I just was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about your vision or how you see us as what we have right now. How can we make it better? How can we make you, the scientist, better at what you're doing and delivering?
Sure, I can comment on that. We've been really excited about the potential for data in EMRs. I think there's an immense potential there. In fact, the early warning system that we have in our internal medicine unit, a huge driver of those predictions and that accuracy is text notes. And we did one project. There's a few of these that we've done, but the one I'm going to pick on is in our tuberculosis clinic using their EMR data. And they're used to doing these manual chart abstractions to go through the EMR, collect the information, figure out what the quality of care is and all that sort of stuff. That takes months and months to do. By the time you get that done, you're about 6 months out, your data is dated, and then you wonder, well, okay, are we still the same? So we were able to take, I would say, probably 80% or so of the variables that they were interested in, and crank that out through digging to the EMR, having a process to grab that information, putting it into structured form. So instead of taking 3 months or so with a couple of people working on it, about 1.5 minutes. But we weren't able to get at a small subset of those variables. And it's because there was so much variability in how clinicians termed things. Like I remember one of the variables was around homelessness. So terminologies like homeless, shelter, couch surfing, there's so much variability there that the algorithm had trouble. But we got to about 80% or so. I think in the future, what I would say is that the computer scientists are incredible at getting at this sort of stuff, but the collaboration that we have with the clinicians on how these things learn is invaluable. It has to be that partnership.
I just want to add, so we're doing some collaborations around data at St. Mike's and at the Vector Institute, and generally they're going fairly well. Some trends that we're observing is sort of that computer scientists and people in medicine sometimes view research projects from different perspectives. It's been described that medicine kind of wants to have a null hypothesis, and you figure out what questions you can ask to answer that null hypothesis, whereas computer scientists are more discovery-based, which is a very polite way of saying that we just want the data and then we'll try a ton of stuff until it works. And the fact that these two perspectives are somewhat different has led to some, difficulty, and it's not the right word, but like lengthy conversations about how to structure research projects. Compounding this is the fact that computer scientists are mostly motivated by the idea that they want to produce a novel algorithm that's slightly different than all the other algorithms that were out there before. So the novelty is sort of the main thing in terms of the mathematics, which is usually not necessarily the most important thing for a clinical problem. So I think when we keep on working more and more together, just a kind of an understanding of where each group is sort of coming from, what they value from the collaboration would be very valuable. And then, of course, having sort of data and methods kind of being continuously discussed as a group.
We're going to take one last question. We do have, unfortunately, other things to do. This has been a delightful conversation. Microphone 2.
Okay, thank you. I hope this is a good one to end on. My name's Rod Annis. I'm a family doctor in Listowel, and I just wanted to say that I in no way believe any of this AI stuff, and I really want your opinion on why it is. So in my day, it took our IT guys 8 months to fix our fax machine. I have to log into my EMR about 80, or to various portals about 85 different times a day. My computer will freeze 3 times before I can get through 100 lab tests. So why is it that the magical stuff that you guys are doing doesn't translate at all into my world?
I think that was a great question to end on.
Yet.
Do I have to answer? Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, that's a good point. I kind of actually agree with you entirely. So I tried to intimate in my presentation, there's a lot of stuff we can do, but there's a risk that we just think that AI is going to solve absolutely everything, and that's the wrong perspective to take. AI is going to be useful in some situations. It'll take the load off some situations, but not all, A. And B, when it is taking the load off in some scenarios, it will still also make mistakes. So it won't be right 100% of the time, so we have to be aware of that also. So as we're actually deploying AI in the field now, and we're getting these reports, generally things are going so well, but something that kind of keeps me up at night is like, what if we missed something and de-identification fails entirely on premises? And we're not there yet, so there's still a lot of work left to be done, basically. So, AI and medicine is not something that's going to be something we talk about in 2019, but hopefully it's something we kind of discuss in hushed tones over the next couple of decades.
I think from a more sort of socio-cultural perspective, we have a clash of two cultures. And the culture of computer science and the culture of medicine. And C.P. Snow, in his famous book many, many years ago, wrote about different kind of clash of two cultures. So there's a process of acculturation that's going on that has a lot of lumps and bumps in getting there. My concern is, where is the clinician in this? Where is the organizations leading the charge in this and working seamlessly with our colleagues in computer science? We heard some examples today, but they have to become more prominent. When it comes to the electronic medical record in the States, it was purely a billing operation, and only latter did it get into more clinical stuff. I'm always very comfortable when I come to Canada, by the way, and to prove that point, if I took off this jacket of my suit, it says Made in Canada. I wanted you all to know that.
Thank you very much. I'd like to invite Sohail back up to conclude remarks.
Great. So I want to thank all of our panelists. I want to thank Dr. Wartman for giving a great keynote address. I want to thank Dr. Mamdani for talking to us about just how wonderful some of the benefits of AI can be, and for Dr. Rudzicz for some really kind of amazing work. I never would have thought that I would see the day where you could actually maybe tell a surgeon what to do. Still can't? Okay, all right, thanks, Stella. So we learned a lot about AI today. We learned a lot about machine learning. We learned a lot about how diagnostics can help us with our tools. And I think most importantly what we learned is we learned about the importance of keeping an eye on our future, because the future is coming very, very quickly. And as I think Dr. Hill mentioned in her speech, we learned more in the past 10 years than we've done in the past 100. And that's going to be an exponential learning curve that we have to face in the future, and we need to be prepared for it. So with that, I want to thank each of the speakers individually with just a small token of our appreciation. So Dr. Wartman, if you wouldn't mind. And then Dr. Mamdani. And of course, Dr. Rudzicz. Great, thank you very much.